All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me this evening. As I think most of you know, sugar has found its way into the foods we eat every day, but it's not always obvious. So products with added sugars, they're being advertised as healthy, and ingredient labels feature numerous names for sugar that most people wouldn't recognize. Overall, shifting through some of the do's and the don'ts of sugar in this food industry has become a very confusing and difficult task. Today, we're going to go over a lot of information, not to overwhelm you or confuse you further, but to help you make more informed choices about the food you eat. There is a chat box available for comments and questions, and I'll be checking it regularly. Right. So this is my first live class, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. Let me give you just a brief background of myself. I've worked many years, about 15 plus, in healthcare technology as a marketing strategist. I'm a registered yoga teacher, and I'm also now a certified holistic health coach. Sugar and the overconsumption of it is a matter that is really important to me, as I was only in my 20s when I was told I was pre-diabetic. It was shocking. If I didn't make changes right away, I would have been looking at many years of chronic health issues and probably medication management. I hope that you take something away from this class. So let's jump right in. So I think we all know, as I've already said, sugar comes in many forms beyond that white powder that we often associate it with. Some sugars even are said to be better than others, and some have names you really wouldn't even recognize on an ingredient label, if you even read down that far. The whole subject of sugar in the health industry is just so confusing. You hear things like, it's okay in moderation, or your body isn't designed to digest sugars. Or how about sugar-free products are always healthy, and artificial sweeteners, they're worse. Or you need sugar for energy. And lastly, sugar is addictive. We hear all of these common claims, and they all oppose one another. But one thing is for certain, we're consuming way more sugar in our diets than we ever have before. Please skip 2 slides. There you go. So according to the United States Department of Agriculture, the average American, and this just is shocking to me still, and I've read this statistic many times, the average American consumes 150 to 170 pounds of refined sugar, that's pounds, of refined sugar per year. Now, in the 1800s, this was about 4 to 6 pounds of sugar. And even in the 1900s, it reached a high of about 90 pounds. And you're probably thinking, that can't be right. That's a lot of sugar. But that figure is correct. 150 to 170 pounds a year. That translates to about a quarter or half a pound of sugar per day, 30 to 60 teaspoons, which is 10 times the recommendation from the American Heart Association. So the American Heart Association suggests an added sugar limit of no more than about 100 calories per day. So for women, that translates to about 6 teaspoons. And for men, that translates to about 9 teaspoons. And so we're 10 times where we should be. It's hard to believe that we're capable of consuming that much sugar, but this is why it's so important to understand you're not just consuming sugar in your coffee and in your baked goods, but it's hidden in the majority of foods you probably eat regularly. So sugar is added into foods maybe that you wouldn't expect. Some of the common culprits are ketchup, barbecue sauces, tomato sauces and marinades, salad dressings, yogurts, breads, peanut butter, even soup. You can also find them in canned fruits, of course, cereals, crackers, and oatmeal before we add our toppings. And this list doesn't even include the obvious culprits like soda, cookies, and ice cream. But these are just some of the many surprising ways sugar sneaks into our diet. Now, just think for a minute. Did any of these particularly surprise you? So, one of the main reasons you might not recognize all the sugar that you have in your diet is because it rarely says sugar on the ingredient list of the foods you buy. Instead, you'll see things like dextrose, maltose, glucose and fructose, corn syrup and sucrose. Those are some of the real popular ones. But you also see high fructose corn syrup, simple corn sweetener, sorbitol, agave nectar, carbitol, evaporated cane juice, galactose, rice malt, and lots of different nectars. And as I'm sure you can guess already, that's not even the full list. There's plenty more out there. So when you go past the nutrition label, which I will always encourage you to do, a few tips for identifying the sugars that are in the ingredients would be to look for words that end in OSE or IDES. And sometimes you need to examine the entire ingredient list because a lot of times you'll find there's more than one type of sugar in the products. All right, so this is what I get asked a lot. If all of the sugar is already in the food that we eat, why should we care? It's not like everyone is sick, right? Well, the problem is with excessive sugar consumption, most health issues don't manifest immediately. And if they do, they're not usually recognized as being caused by our diets. Take, for example, mental illness and different behavioral problems. Those are often attributed to other sources beyond our diet. Things like allergies, arthritis, and migraines, those are usually explained by our environment, by stress levels, and responses to medication. Immune disorders, degenerative diseases, diabetes, and cancer take a lot of time to diagnose. And most people aren't grabbing their food journals at this point to search for that connection. But there is more and more research being conducted on the effects of sugar on the human health by the day. And let me tell you, it's not looking so great for sugar's case. So to best understand how sugar is so dangerous, you must first know what it's made of. Before sugar even leaves the digestive tract, it's composed of two simple sugars, glucose and fructose. Now, glucose is an important energy source, and it's really easy to obtain. And if we're not consuming it in our diets, our bodies will produce it already. Simple as that. But fructose is different. Our bodies do not produce much of it. And quite frankly, there's no need for our bodies to do that. In fact, there's really no proven physiological need for fructose at all. All right, so the relationship between sugar and insulin resistance has become a crucial topic of discussion. Insulin is one of the most important hormones in our body. It's responsible for directing that glucose into our cells to be used for energy. However, when there's too much sugar in the diet, the cells in your muscles, your fat, your liver, they can stop responding well to that insulin and stop easily taking up glucose from your blood. Now, as a result of that, your pancreas is going to make more and more insulin to try to help those cells to absorb it. And the cells don't. And that's where we get insulin resistance from. And over time, the pancreas keeps producing and can't keep up with the demand. And this is what causes the blood sugar to not be able to be maintained at a healthy, moderated level. And so insulin resistance is now thought to be a big contributor to many diseases, things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and even cardiovascular disease. Even after these diseases develop, elevated blood sugar remains an ongoing problem. This excess is often the reason with these illnesses experience other complications. So things like blindness and diabetes, for example. So just some symptoms of insulin resistance. It might come as extreme thirst or hunger, feeling hungry even after you've had a full meal, increased or frequent urination, tingling in the hands or feet, feeling more tired than usual, frequent infections. So it's no secret that obesity is a serious epidemic. 1 of 3 children and 2 out of 3 adults are either overweight or obese in the United States. That's a large piece of our population. So sugar's role in gaining weight is much more serious than just adding in some empty calories. Instead, it affects the hormones that are responsible for making you feel satisfied and no longer hungry. So it leads you to eat more and more. I think you can maybe start to see the problem here. But knowing this alone strengthens the case that there is a 60% increased risk of obesity in children for every daily serving of sugar-sweetened beverages in their diet. So that's not just soda, that's fruit juices, and that's drinks like Gatorade. It's important to note that weight gain from sugar is also present in the abdominal area. And ladies, I know that that's often already a sensitive point for us. But this visceral fat there, it breeds a higher risk profile for other diseases, some which can be life-threatening. So sugar is a leading factor in the rise in obesity and many other serious health complications, right? So in the past, you've heard it's fat, or you've heard it's carbohydrates, or you've heard it's dairy, right? But underneath it all, it's the sugar. So going back to fructose, which I mentioned earlier, one of those main components of sugar, it is metabolized by the liver, but only in significant amounts at a time. So this wouldn't be a problem if everyone was able to minimize their sugar intake back to that 6 to 9 teaspoons a day. And at the same time, we would need to increase our physical activity each day. If we did that, the fructose, would be turned into glycogen, and that would then be stored in the liver for safekeeping until our bodies were ready to burn off this energy reserve. However, if there's already an ample amount of glycogen stored in the liver, eating more just overloads it, and the body is forced to turn that extra sugar or that extra glycogen into fat. So this process is the beginning of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which can cause a variety of complications. To take it even further, some studies have suggested that sugar can be just as damaging as alcohol is to the liver, even if you're at a healthy weight. Now, the good news is the liver can repair itself, but with that continuous sugar consumption, it doesn't get a break, and it needs that break in order to repair itself. Oh, sorry about that. Let me just catch right up to where we were. All right. So earlier I said that too much sugar can lead to cardiovascular diseases. There's been a lot of conversation and some misconceptions on what causes cardiovascular disease, the role in cholesterol, and what foods really help or harm heart health. So things have started to clear up quite a bit. Saturated fat isn't really, and there's like a big asterisk there, the culprit that we thought it was, but sugar is. And you heard that right. Sugar consumption is a leading contributor to the #1 killer of this world, which is heart disease. Studies have shown that consuming a large amount of fructose can cause a rise in bad cholesterol, also known as LDL, blood glucose, insulin levels, and abdominal obesity. These findings were apparent in as little as 10 weeks. All of these factors are major risk factors in developing heart disease. And at the end of this, I'll put a couple links to some studies into the chat where you can see some more of how they're linking sugar consumption with heart disease. It's not light reading, but it might be very interesting. All right, so moving on, right? Moving through the body. Your immune system, right? I think maybe we all know, is responsible for defending your body against illness. And I know that's been a huge topic of conversation over the last 2 years. And that's a big deal. So when your immune system becomes compromised, you're putting yourself in danger of pathogens that can make you very sick. According to a study through Loma Linda University, 100 grams of sugar can make your white blood cells 40% less effective in killing germs. So 100 grams of sugar can make your white blood cells 40% less effective in killing germs. On top of already putting your body in a stressed and irritated state, sugar directly affects your main line of defense against disease. And perhaps the most alarming part of this, and it was actually a surprise to me, is that sugar's crippling effects can stay present in your system for up to 5 hours after you eat it. So it's hard to believe that something that is so prevalent in our everyday diets can cause cancer, can really cause any of the problems that we've just talked about. And it is linked to cancer. Cancer is an uncontrolled growth and the multiplication of cells, and it's one of the leading causes of death worldwide. So how is sugar related to cancer? It comes back to insulin. Insulin, again, is one of the main hormones responsible for regulating the growth of these cells. It's been concluded that having constantly elevated insulin levels can indeed contribute to cancer. So do you remember what I said earlier about insulin and sugar? Consuming sugar raises insulin levels. Now, there's a considerable amount of evidence how this contributes to cancer risk and progression. And again, I'll put another link to a reading that you can go a little bit deeper into this and some of the studies that have been done here. All right. Now we're moving up. Let's talk about sugar and the brain, because it can actually affect our brain quite significantly. So studies here have shown that sugar slows down the brain's function. It hinders new learnings and can decrease memory recall. There are also strong connections between high sugar intake and the prevalence of depression and anxiety. What do you think of when you think of a sugar crash? Is it irritability, decreased mood, brain fog, fatigue? Now, imagine that not going away. Foods that are rich in sugar disrupt our brain's neurotransmitters that work to stabilize our moods. However, if we are continually disrupting the function of these receptors, we no longer have the inherent control over our moods as we usually do. According to Dr. Karazian, a functional medicine expert and author, this is also a huge contribution to chronic depression. And I have a really great video that's on YouTube that I will share with you as well in the chat. So we hear the word addiction quite often, and sometimes we use it rather lightly. Sometimes we say we're addicted to our favorite food, but that isn't necessarily encompassing the real meaning of the word. So the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, defines addiction as a primary chronic disease of the brain's reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. And this is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing that reward or relief by substance use and other behaviors. Addiction is often characterized by an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control, craving, diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behaviors and interpersonal relationships, and a dysfunctional emotional response. Like other chronic diseases, addiction often involves cycles and relapse and remission. Without treatment or engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and can result in disability or premature death. Now, I know that's a pretty long and intense definition, but it's important to really know what we're talking about when we say sugar is addicting. And more studies are coming out and showing that sugar truly is addicting. And if we think about it with dopamine, right? Dopamine is this neurotransmitter that's responsible for controlling the reward and pleasure responses of the brain. So in this example, when you eat a lot of sugar, right, a massive amount of dopamine is released in your brain. I think we've all had that sugar high, or we've certainly seen children after a piece of cake or some ice cream suddenly bouncing around off of the walls. But as you continue to consume sugar, the dopamine receptors become less powerful, making the response less effective. And so you get that continual craving to eat more sugar so that you can create that same euphoric dopamine reaction. And this continues into that vicious cycle, very, very similar to what happens with drug addictions. There was actually a study done that helped to prove the addictive qualities in sugar. And it was done using rats and Oreos. Now, these rats were previously drug addicted. And when they studied these rats, the pleasure regions of these rats' brains were significantly more active when exposed to Oreo cookies compared to cocaine. Pretty shocking, right? And again, I have that study and I'm happy to share it with y'all after. A later study also showed that the brains of people with food addiction reacted to sugar in much the same way as drug addicts react to drugs. This is really proof that sugar can take over our brain chemistry and deliberately make us crave and eat more of it. Kind of dark. Who knew sugar could have this much effect on the body? But we're getting into some good stuff, right? There's some positive news out there. Sugar is obviously a negative contribution to our health and our lives, but not all sugars are created equally. It's true that some are much worse for us than others, and some aren't so bad. So the next couple of slides, I'll go through some of the sugars that we should definitely avoid as much as possible, as well as some recommended alternatives. So just for a minute, think, do you use any sugar alternatives? All right, so let's start with which ones we really want to avoid. Aspartame, sucralose, and high fructose corn syrup. And I'm going to go through each one of them just so you can sort of hear why we should avoid them. All right, so aspartame is a chemical sweetener best known for its appearance in diet sodas. Some people can tolerate it well in the short term, but other people report having migraines and different digestive issues from it. Regardless of the initial reaction, though, aspartame has proved pretty dangerous in isolated situations. So, for example, the University of Liverpool conducted a study where aspartame was mixed with common food coloring. The result was clear toxicity to brain cells. Additionally, researchers found that when aspartame breaks down, it creates formaldehyde, a well-known carcinogen, which is just gross. With so many other options for sugar out there, let's just cross aspartame out. So sucralose is another common one, and it's actually more likely that you know it by the brand name Splenda. Huge when I was growing up. Well, sucralose or Splenda is processed using chlorine. And researchers are also starting to find that the waste of those consuming this sugar can't be broken down in wastewater treatment centers. Imagine what that means for what it's doing inside of our bodies and our digestive system. Right? And the last, third one, you really want to avoid high fructose corn syrup. This one's probably a bit more challenging to avoid. It's in almost everything. It's in a ton of processed foods. It's what's made the big switch in the last few years, or maybe last decade at this point. And the thing is, this sweetener plays a huge role in the fat buildup in the liver, leptin resistance, and major weight gain. A study even found that high fructose corn syrup is sometimes laced with mercury, which is a heavy metal linked to heart disease and developmental disorders like autism. But don't worry, the next slide, we've got a bright spot. There are some safer sugar alternatives: stevia, coconut sugar, and raw honey. So stevia, and Dad, I know you ask a lot about this one, so this one's for you. It's a sweetener. It's an extract made from the leaves of the stevia plant. It is shown to help balance our fasting blood sugar levels, cholesterol, insulin resistance, and blood pressure. However, it's important to pay attention to the source of stevia. Some brands include additional additives, so you want to always be sure to check the label. So coconut sugar is one of my favorites. It's a natural sweetener, it's unrefined, and it still contains all of its vitamins and minerals. It does not contribute to the strong fluctuations in blood sugar like some of the other refined added sugars, and it tastes delicious. And lastly, raw honey. So honey has less fructose and provides other health benefits like promoting heart health and fighting inflammation. And if you can find some local raw honey, like at a farmer's market or maybe in one of the stores, it can also help support you during allergy season. But as always, and like we talked about earlier, too much of a good thing can be bad. So please keep in mind that these alternatives do still break down to glucose and fructose in your body, and all sweeteners should be used infrequently, right? So we really want to bring it down from that 30 to 60 teaspoons a day. Maybe it won't happen overnight, getting down to the 6 to 9, but let's start walking it back. So it might be ideal, but it's not practical to cut out sugar entirely. And I mean, as I mentioned before, it's hidden in nearly everything. But finding these healthier alternatives, practicing moderation, and being aware of the dangers, and there's quite a few, is the best way to take action on this case against sugar. If I can leave you with a few things to consider, it would be first, remove soda, diet and full calorie from your lifestyle. Try different flavored waters and seltzer instead. When I first started to lose weight, coincidentally, but now I actually know a lot better, Diet Coke was the first thing I happened to cut out, thinking it was just making me snack worse. But there's a lot of things in Diet Coke, not just the fake sugars, that can be really bad for the body. So try to remove it if you can, at least cut it down. The next thing I would encourage you to do is start reading the ingredient labels. So not just the nutrition facts or the nutrition information. Now, I recognize that this might take a little bit longer to get through the supermarket if this is what you're doing, but it can be so eye-opening if you just take a look at some of the ingredients that are in there. And more now you can find products that have fewer ingredients, that have more natural, more organic ingredients in there. And you might find some really great substitutions in the store. So what do you do if you have that sugar craving? Try to start by eating some fresh, in-season, whole fruit instead. I know it's not the same as a piece of cake or ice cream or cookie, but the way the body is going to recognize that sugar and digest that sugar can be so much more beneficial than that instant gratification of the sweets. And last, but maybe just as importantly, move your body regularly. As we heard earlier, physical activity can help support our body's organs by preventing excess fat storage and help us flush out that extra sugar. And you don't have to be running marathons or riding bikes or, doing some kind of really crazy workout every day. But just add some motion, 20 minutes of walking, getting up and down from your desk during the day. Small things like that. You always hear taking the stairs, parking a little bit further from the entrance to the store. Any little thing you can do to get your body moving will help your body process through some of that extra sugar and eventually start to help support you in the craving fight as well. All right, so I know I just shared a ton of information with you, and it might be a bit overwhelming. It might be a little bit dark. Sugar can really have a much bigger impact on the body than I think we ever really knew was possible. But it's okay. Changing your eating habits and taking control of your health requires a lot of effort, and it's incredibly rewarding. You will experience a higher quality of life, maintain a healthy weight, have more natural energy, and can prevent serious illness. There is so much value in kicking sugar to the curb and becoming the healthiest version of you. And I know you can do it. If you feel like you need support on phasing sugar out of your diet, or you want to have a conversation about anything that I shared here with you this evening, please send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions, or go one step further and set up a free health consultation with me. My website, my email address, my phone number, they're all on the screen for you. So thank you for taking the time to experience my first live class, The Case Against Sugar. I love sharing this topic with people who are just so eager to transform their health. And this group was just fantastic. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. Okay, so Lori has a great question. What do you think of monk fruit as a sugar alternative? What do you think about the sugar alcohols? So I think monk fruit, I'm not super familiar with it actually. It sounds though like similar to the stevia plant, that you just want to make sure where it was coming from, and that there's no other additives in there. I think sugar alcohols can be really challenging for the body to break down. So I would limit them as best you can. But I'll look into it too. And if I find anything different, I'll get back to you on that. Yeah. Okay, Dad, you can have your Bob's mashed potatoes. All right. Are there any other questions? I'm happy to stay on for a little bit and talk a little bit more. And if not, feel free to sign out of the Zoom. And I did record this. There was a lot of information here tonight, so I'll make sure that you all get the recording. And again, reach out. It was so great to see you all and be with you this evening. Thank you.